Hey YouTube, what's up? It's me. I'm back again. Hope you're well. I'm not. I've got a chest infection, and I've not had one for years. I can't remember the last time I had a chest infection. Decades ago, I think. It's gone right down deep in my chest. Oh, it sucks. I don't know if maybe it's COVID. I've got a COVID. Anyway, the Renaissance. Thought I'd do a off the cuff chat about the Renaissance. I'm not an expert historian. Are we still in the Dark Ages? That's my question. Was there ever a golden age? Remember the good old days? Remember when there was nothing? We just worshipped trees. Remember, there was nothing. Good old days. The Renaissance was a movement in Europe. It centered in Florence, right? That's what I know about it. And then it spread across Europe. Is there a connection between the word, Aristotle and aristocracy? Yes, there is. Aristotle went to Plato's academy. Plato's academies were the mystery school academies, one of them, from the Greek era. Plato Academy. Aristotle is pretty much one of them, he's the sort of person, the icon of Western sciences, right? Aristotle. Aristotle was the person who took Socrates' teachings, Archimedes, Plato, Pythagoras, and basically was able to unify the concepts of that and came up with our modern take, our modern look, science, logical scientific inquiry. But, Aristotle was just one of many people over hundreds of years in the Greek civilization that studied the Norse, the knowledge, right? It was... So then, we fell into the Dark Ages. The Romans burnt the Library of Alexandria. Then the Romans took Christianity and created another religion from Christianity, Catholicism, right? But Rome didn't burn, did it, in a day? It didn't burn in 100 years or 200 years. It pretty much took over 1,000 years for the Roman Empire to completely collapse. And did it ever collapse, right? One way of describing the fall of the Roman Empire in a nutshell, we had the Rome was based in Italy. Roman Empire was based in Italy, but then it spread and conquered, and then it had another base in Constantinople, right? Well, the Roman Empire didn't collapse completely in Constantinople until about 1400, right? So then that branch of the Roman Empire went up through Eastern Europe. We're talking about the tentacles now of the Russian Empire. That old ancient regime, that medieval philosophy and outlook, you could say is still truly alive in Russia. Medieval regime is like Iran, right? That's a medieval regime. It's the old order. So I might be flip-flopping and jumping about a lot in this conversation. I was going to say something then, and it just ran away from me. Never mind. It will come back to me, right? Let's do some reading from Wikipedia to get back on point. Renaissance humanism is a worldview centered on the nature and importance of humanity that emerged in the study of classical antiquity. Renaissance humanists sought to create a citizenry able to speak and write with eloquence and clarity, and thus capable of engaging in the civic life of their communities and persuading others to virtuous and prudent actions. Humanism, while set up by a small elite who had access to books and education, was intended as a cultural movement to influence all society. It was a program to revive the cultural heritage, literary legacy, and moral philosophy of the Greco-Roman civilization. Well, forget the Romans, because it goes back to the Greeks, right? In Plato's Academy. And you could say Plato's Academy is the root of academia, right? Of modern concept of academies. All heralds, in the Western world, it all heralds back to Plato's Academy, who Aristotle was a student of, right? And so in the West, in Europe now, I'm, making the connection here between the word aristocracy and Aristotle, right? So the aristocracy, a word for that is a select of elite. And that's what what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, aristocracy basically means, it's a word that describes, a small elite group of enlightened people with the knowledge, the gnosis, from the Platonic academies, right? And, Aristotle is one of the main figureheads that represents the peak of that enlightenment. I'm going to have to pause here because I need to cough. I just had a coughing fit. I'll tell you what, there's a nasty ass bug travelling around at the moment. I think it might be COVID though. Anyway, where were we? Cultural movement. Right, it was intended as a cultural movement to influence all society. It was a program to revive the cultural heritage of the golden age. A golden age, literary legacy, and moral philosophy of the Greco-Roman civilization. Romans sort of stole it, didn't they? Turned it into their own. Just like Russia does now, right? Invading countries, stealing their heritage and then calling it their own. The thing is, we can all call it our own. No one discovers this initially without any hindsight, right? It's just a case of discovering it and rediscovering it. And that goes right back. The thing is, the early civilizations, like the one that was flourished in Europe, or the civilizations that were flourishing in Europe before, well, around the Greek time, didn't write down and document like the Greeks did, right? A lot of the knowledge, for instance, in Europe, was held by the high priests of Druidry, right? And their knowledge was contained within rhymes and songs and poems, and it wasn't written down. So that's what my point is. A lot of knowledge that was developed, we lost, right? Or we don't have, it wasn't lost necessarily, but because there was no written record of it, it's a very murky investigation, right? What we do have, however, is the Greek literature. So, you know, with the moving through the early Roman period and their period of organized religion building of Christianity and Catholicism and their, you know, all of that, right? The knowledge wasn't lost, but it you know, a lot of the great libraries were destroyed, right? We're all familiar with Cleopatra and, you know, the burning of the Library of Alexandria. But there were many centres of learning across the Mediterranean and Europe and, you know, North Africa, Middle East. So, you know, even though the knowledge wasn't lost completely, a lot of it was destroyed. We commonly refer to it as the Dark Ages, don't we? So my point is, you know, the Renaissance, we all should know this by now, right? The Renaissance was a resurgence of that Greek knowledge, Greek Roman, right? Gnosis. You know, a lot of what we would term loosely, you know, if you want to call it all one term, mystery schools, whether they were Hebrew mystic schools, Christian mystic schools, you know, or whatever. Greek mystery schools, right? They all, through looking at the symbology of their emblems, of their temples, and in their writings, right, you can come to an assumption that they all have a common origin. And that you know, I don't want to try and prove that to you in my video now. You should be able to just, you know, you don't need a succession of pictures to prove the case, right? This channel's not about entertaining you, right? Because if I wanted to just entertain you, I could just put all the pictures together with some clever editing, yeah? And sort of, you know, without giving you any information, make it visually appealing through pretty lights and dancing patterns, right? And make it very entertaining for you. You won't gain any knowledge though, right? But the symbols that we're discussing, those symbols are related to, you know, the religious aspect of creation. That's where the mathematical patterns in nature that we see, that's why they're reflected in the temple, right? So I want to make that point. I don't want to sound too mystical. Right, it first began in Italy and then spread across Western Europe, 14th and 15th and 16th century. So, you know, a couple of hundred years, right? A few hundred years. But are we fully out of the Dark Ages? During the period, the term humanist, Italian, humanista, referred to teachings and students of the humanities, known as the Studia Humanitatis. Excuse my pronunciation. which included the study of Latin and ancient Greek literatures, grammar, rhetoric, history, poetry, and moral philosophy. It was not until the 19th century this began to be called humanism instead of the original humanities, and later the retronym Renaissance humanism to distinguish it from later humanist development. So yeah, let's move on. Did I want to make a point now? We're talking about a time in history when the Roman Catholic Church started, in a way, to lose its grip on the narrative, right? And the narrative of the Christian Church was, the history, historically, of the Christian Bible, right? What the Renaissance started to do through, the Renaissance really, in my opinion, was all about the early book printing was able to distribute the knowledge to the masses in such a way that, the balance tipped eventually, right? Because there was a tide of knowledge that was questioning the science and the history, literal meaning from the Bible. So, it was, without me prattling on about it, you can pretty much come to your own conclusion, right? I don't want to give you, a precise history lesson, right? One of the most fascinating things about this research is discovering things for yourself, right? I'm holding back from saying things because I want people to start getting it, because that's what enlightenment, that's the joy of enlightenment, right? It can give you a eureka moment when you have a revelation, and put the pieces of the puzzle together for yourself. It's an amazing experience. I've had many of them in my lines of, over the years. And every day's a school day, isn't it? Right? Where are we to? During the Renaissance period, most humanists were Christians. So the concern was to purify and renew Christianity, not to do away with it. Their vision was to return ad fontes to pure sources, to the Gospels, the New Testament, and the Church Fathers, bypassing the complexities of medieval Christian theology. That's a lot to unravel, though. I'm not attacking Christianity, just to make that point. It might sound like I'm attacking some Christians, and that's very, justified in my opinion. I think we're still we're still coming out of the dark ages, right? The knowledge, the gnosis, hasn't filtered down to the common pleb, right? Excuse the term, right? The mob don't get it. Now, there could be sinister reasons to do with that. I mean, it's not all sinister though, yeah? I don't think there's been a worldwide plot by an small elite group of beings to control us. But I think there is some truth to that proposition, right? I think the powers that be in the Christian church, some of those powers that be, old hardliners of the old regime, might have a valid interest to withhold certain knowledge. You could even suggest that the elite circles of aristocracy have suppressed the knowledge. Do they want the plebs and the mob to get it, right? Well, I don't think Christianity, like Catholic Christianity, would do, right? Because the more people who are enlightened with the gnosis are less able to be influenced by a religion that is metaphysically and historically inaccurate, right? But if you have a modern way of looking at Christianity, you can, and you don't take the Bible for word literal translation, right? and I've met many Christians that don't take the words of the Bible literally, right? You can still retain your, belief in the teachings of Jesus Christ and blend that with the knowledge of the Renaissance, of the of Aristotle, the knowledge of Aristotle, and the Platonic mystery schools. If we all had that foundational knowledge, would the world be a much better place, right? Do you need Christianity to give you a morality? These big questions have been being battled out, on a big scale now. Really, with the ideologies that we are faced with, the hardliners of those ideologies, the hardliners of right-wing Islamic State, the hard right-liners of the Jewish religion, the hardliners right-wing Christians, right? I was going to make a point. It's escaped me. I forgot it. It'll come back to me. Right, definition. Very broadly, the project of the Italian Renaissance humanists of the 14th and 15th centuries was the Studia Humanitatis, the study of the humanities, a curriculum focused on language skills. This project sought to recover the culture of ancient Greece and Rome through its literature and philosophy, and to use this classical revival to imbue the ruling classes with the moral attitudes of said ancients. A project James Hankins calls one of virtual politics. Oh, this all rings true now, doesn't it? But what this Stadia Humanitatis actually constituted is a subject of much debate, according to one scholar of the movement. Okay, well, let's not get bogged down with that, but we can all work out the the comparisons of the battle of ideologies in the modern age, can't we? What have we got? We've got the hard right Christian ideology attacking the virtues of wokeism and left leaning liberalism. Yeah, this left and right of ideology we're still in the dark ages, aren't we? Is my point. Right, we're coming out of it though. Yeah, I'm trying to illuminate you. I don't want to sound like a prick. I'm not illuminated. Look, I'm just some bloke from Somerset, a bricklayer who had an interest in architecture and then started studying the classical literature. So anyway, I want to get to a point here. Let's go back a page a minute. Renaissance humanism, right? Okay, so Renaissance, right? So the Renaissance is a period of history in European cultural movement, covering the fifth. Right, we've been through that. The Renaissance intellectual basis was founded in its version of humanism. Right, we've been through that. Hang on, are we just reading all the same stuff now? Right, okay. I wanted to get to a point. Right, let me pause it and find this a minute. All right, we'll go through this quickly. It's just, it is a tie-in. As a cultural movement, the Renaissance encompassed innovative flowering of literacy, Latin, and an explosion of vernacular literatures, beginning with the 14th century resurgence of learning based on the classical sources, which contemporaries had credited to Petrarch. Excuse my pronunciation. Petrarch. Whatever. The development of linear perspective and other techniques of rendering a more natural reality in painting and gradual but widespread educational reform. It saw sporadic artistic developments and contributions from such polymaths as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, who inspired the term Renaissance man. There's a big tie into our research here, yeah. Leonardo da Vinci and his squared man, right, and the proportions and measurements of that man in the squared circle, right? The symbolism of that, it ties into our squared circle. And the knowledge of the polymaths associated with the basic polygons and the principles of proportions, right? That's what this channel's about at the moment. It doesn't say it in black and white here though, but it's hinting at that, right? And this is the thing in the study. Many scholars hint at the suggestion. 400 years ago, if you were write about this openly, you could quite probably be burnt at the stake, right? Maybe a bit longer than 400 years ago. If you were openly discussing this 2,500 years ago, you could be poisoned with hemlock or whatever, right? Killed. Anyway, let's not get too morbid. The Renaissance period started during the crisis of the late Middle Ages and conventionally ends by 1600s. The Roman Empire slowly dismantled, but it didn't dismantle completely, did it? You could argue it just changed the shop front. But there was so much upheaval, there's so much history to go through, to wade through. You know. The Roman Empire slowly dismantled, moved east into Constantinople, then moved north, right? And you could say that was the imperial empire building of the Russian Empire. The West has got its same dark, murky past though, hasn't it? Like, you know. Excuse me. Oh, I just need to pause that. I'm going to cough. Right. I just had another massive coughing fit. I don't laugh, because if I laugh, I'm going to cough. Oh, man. I've got the COVID. Right, we're going to wrap this video up. The Platonic Academy, right? So we're going back now to the roots of academia, right, in the Western world. Plato's Academy, right? All of the symbols of all of the crafts and the fraternal groups, mystery schools, secret societies, Jewish, Christian, whatever. All of their emblems herald back thousands of years, right? This is the big tie-in with symbols in religion and basic principles in geometry. What is maths is basically the crux, right? Here's a picture of Plato's Academy. We've got the tree, a tree of knowledge, the sacred tree from the sacred grove. And then there's 3 pillars here, right? What is the pillar? The 2 pillars. The 2 pillars represent the duality of nature, right? Opposite forces between light and dark. It is about duality. The number 2, in a mystical sense, represents duality, right? So tying back into now our creation myth. Number 1 represents the circle, right? Or our first important creation ratio, our first important ratio in our creation is linked to the number 1 and the circle. In our creation myth, then we're developing it further by bringing order, by introducing the square, and also we're introducing the shape of the triangle and its proportions and associations to the rhombus, right? So our first basic 3 shapes in our temple, in our universe creation: the circle, the square, and the triangle or rhombus, right? Triangle represents number 3, square represents number 4. What shape represents number 2? There is none. You could say 2 pillars though, couldn't you? Right? So if you look down onto a column, what shape is it? What's the plan view of a column? It doesn't have to be a circle. It could be square, but often it's a circle, right? It's the universal pole, and the 2 pillars represents the duality of number 2, light and dark, the opposing forces of light and dark, good and bad, up and down, heaven and earth. 2 is an abstract principle. 1 is whole, it means everything. 2, you can look at it in accounting sense and basic logistical sense. A line, a symbol of a line from point A to point B. A line represents the circle. It is a bit, it's not mystical, it's just not obvious, is it? We're talking about symbolism in the mystery schools, right? Going back in antiquity. The 3 pillars and the 2 pillars. My point is that the 2 pillars in classical architecture as well, 2 pillars with an arch on top. There's mathematical and polymathematical information to do with the polygons in the temple building. They're principles from nature. And this is what the Platonic academies were about, right? The observations in nature, and then the scientific, rational way of explaining what those forces are. That's what the cosmology is. That's what our science is, right? So my point is that religion is a cosmology. Science is a cosmology. My point is all of the symbolism from religion heralds back to a common origin, and that common origin was a scientific way of explaining the universe. And it was always expressed in the architecture of temple building. I think I've made that point. Right, so I'm going to try and end the video. Well, I'm not going to try and end it. I am going to wrap this video up now. Let's do a bit of reading now. Yeah. Have we read that? Right, okay, let's start off. The Platonic Academy and the academic school was founded at Athens by Plato, circa 387 BC. Before founding his own school, the Lyceum, the academy persisted throughout the Hellenistic period as a skeptical school until coming to an end after the death. Look, you can read that. Let's not get bogged down in all the history. I want to make a point and end the video. Here we go. I've been down this line before, right? Grove of olive trees. The symbolism of the 2 trees, the 2 pillars, right, is about a sacred grove, right? What is a grove? Well, it's just a place where you grow trees that's sacred, right? Could be a hill, could be anywhere, could be near a well, on a mountain, wherever really, but a grove of trees before the days of architecture, architecture, technologically based building, right? Architecture. Before the days of that, when we were spear chuckers running around, right, in fig leaves, the symbolism of of Eve taking the fruit from the tree of knowledge and giving it to Adam is a geometrical allegory for the temple. The temple's, there's lots of symbolism in religions to do with a tree, two trees, tree of life, tree of knowledge. The duality of nature. The cosmic temple. The universal pole, if you like. Is that amazing enough for me to end the video on? I think we will leave it there. I've prattled on long enough today. I doubt if many people will listen to this. A few of you might. I hope you gain some snippets from it. Until next time, have a powerful day. See you on the other side.